It's natural that any asset of this size and liquidity has an ETF. I mean, there are triple short NASDAQ ETFs. There's like an ETF for anything you can think of, including really bad ideas, because people either trade them or hold them. And so it's natural that Bitcoin would be an ETF. And it's integrated into the system. And of course, it's good to tell people, like, if you can help it, try to hold the actual thing. If you got, if you're locked into a brokerage or an RIA or your IRA, and you want price exposure, this is a useful vehicle. But I think it's more just like it gives you some legal cover. And one thing that the lawsuit showed was that one is the government's not a monolith, right? So if you look at the SEC, for example, there's already been division in the SEC between Gary and Pierce, Gensler and Pierce. And even this vote was like 3-2 on whether or not they'd approve it.
Lyn Alden is a well-known financial analyst who provides insightful predictions about the future of cryptocurrencies, a disruptive digital frontier that is constantly changing the financial landscape in this day and age. The world struggles to understand how Bitcoin has changed everything. Therefore, Alden's viewpoints are becoming more and more relevant. We go into Alden's insightful analysis in this video, including the most recent advancements like Bitcoin ETFs and the continuing conversation over its place in the world financial system. Alden's examination of the intriguing notion of hyper-Bitcoinization is the main focus, as she muses on the possibility of Bitcoin becoming the dominant global currency. Alden sheds light on Bitcoin's unwavering drive and its ability to upend the current financial system against the backdrop of governments attempting to hold on to control over their fiat currencies. The complicated relationships between established financial systems and the emerging digital asset are explained in this video. Alden offers a thorough perspective on the legitimization of Bitcoin, as seen by the historic acceptance of Bitcoin ETFs, and her insightful assessment of its potential to reduce volatility. Her fair-minded viewpoint clarifies scalability concerns and the larger economic backdrop while acknowledging Bitcoin's ambitious objectives and real-world obstacles. Come explore Alden's outlook on Bitcoin's future as we look at her observations on the difficulties of digital age self-sovereignty and the changing environment around cryptocurrency acceptance and regulation. Her research sheds light on Bitcoin's current situation and suggests a possible future direction for the cryptocurrency. Remember to use the like button, subscribe, and share your thoughts buttons below as you set off on this insightful adventure. Welcome to a deeper exploration of the dynamic finance industry with Lyn Alden.
I think there's a range of outcomes. So I don't have a firm view on the very long-term end game. Basically, money is a competitive good that scales with network effects, and it's one of those things you rarely want to hold the second best money. You generally want to gravitate towards the first. In historical periods where there's been two monies coexisting for a long time, it's usually because one money is not sufficient. So for example, gold and silver coexisted because gold, even one tiny gold coin was more than like a laborer would make in a day or a week maybe. And so you'd have to have the smaller units. And so there's certain contexts like that where it can kind of reach its limitations. I think a big thing will come down to how good are governments at maintaining their own little fiat bubble against the constant push of Bitcoin. Right? We see, for example, developing countries that have inflation problems, they have the constant pressure of dollarization always kind of knocking on their door to kind of push in. And people there in those gray markets, they want dollars. And so, but they've been able to maintain their monopolies anyway because of the technology that's available. They can basically firewall their banks and they can firewall their ports of entry. Bitcoin and stablecoins start to pierce into that. And so you'd expect that over time, as liquidity and acceptance and knowledge of these types of technologies grow, particularly Bitcoin, it can pierce into all these things, and it's increasingly hard to maintain any sort of currency monopoly. But we still don't know the extent that they'll be completely dismantled from being able to do that, or what timeline if it does happen. So whether you look at it as a very, very large monetary asset globally, or virtually the only one, I don't really have a strong view. I think that's all still quite a bit out. But I have pretty high ambitions for what Bitcoin can do. So I think about scaling a lot. And for when I got into Bitcoin, I had also been watching it, studying it for a while. So I went through a phase where I was interested but skeptical to interested and convicted, right? That was a transition I went through. And what I find interesting is that a lot of people are kind of almost come off as constantly surprised by the scaling challenges, even though they were laid out in 2009, 2010. If you look at Satoshi's original emails, even before Bitcoin was launched, just on the mailing list, people were challenging the scaling. They were like, well, how is this going to scale? Or, Hal Finney was talking about Bitcoin banks in 2010. And so this has been there's actually an old joke that basically like any kind of thing you think about Bitcoin, it's all been discussed on Bitcoin Talk in the first couple of years. And this is just another one of those things that's been discussed since like the literally pre-inception of the chain. And so for me, it's when I got in, I had the benefit. The downside is you don't get in at like $10 Bitcoin, but the benefit is you have years of history of kind of people discussing this and seeing how it's worked and kind of understanding all the pros and cons of different approaches. So for me, it was understood from the beginning that it's going to scale in layers. And also when I look at the existing financial system, we see it scale in layers. So for example, there's FedWire. It's the main. It's like the biggest, kind of U.S. settlement system. It's operated by the Fed. They settle $1 quadrillion a year, so $1,000 trillion a year, and they do it with about as many transactions as Bitcoin does. So in a given year, they do 200 million transactions, average of 5 million each, and so you get a quadrillion dollars in gross settlement, which sounds like a cartoonish number.
Lyn Alden acknowledges a variety of possibilities as she analyzes many possible scenarios for Bitcoin's future. In the later portion of her speech, she emphasizes the competitive aspect of money by pointing out that cultures have historically tended to choose the more advanced form of payment. Alden makes the analogy that when two types of money coexist, as was the case with gold and silver in the past, it usually means that one of them has restrictions. After that, Alden turns her attention to how governments function and their capacity to keep control over fiat money in the face of Bitcoin's ongoing effect. She cites examples of local currencies being challenged by the push of dollarization in emerging nations that are experiencing inflation problems. Nonetheless, governments have used technical means to hold on to their monopolies. As for the future, Alden believes that present currency monopolies may be disrupted by emerging technologies like stablecoins and Bitcoin. However, it is still unclear how much of this will occur and when these advancements will occur. Alden does not offer any firm forecasts on the supremacy of Bitcoin in the future, whether it as a major global asset or almost the only one. She stresses the necessity for ongoing observation and the complexity of the changing scene, even as she accepts that Bitcoin has ambitious objectives. Alden offers historical background when considering the scaling problems with Bitcoin, pointing out that these problems have been discussed since the beginning of the cryptocurrency. She emphasizes how critical it is to comprehend the benefits and drawbacks of various scaling strategies. Alden uses FedWire as an example to contrast Bitcoin with the current financial system in order to demonstrate its potential for scalability. Therefore, Alden's perspectives offer a thorough comprehension of the obstacles and possible paths of Bitcoin, taking into account the historical background, governmental structures, and the changing technology environment. Participate in the discussion by leaving your ideas and comments below. Let's go on to the next part of this insightful conversation.
I think UX is going to be a big part of it. So in order to get people to switch, you generally need like an Apple-like UX, which of course is easier to do with custodial than non-custodial. That's kind of the temptation. That's the challenge.
Yeah.
It's also one of those things where people are more incentivized when they specifically have a problem. So for example, if your payments were blocked, you now have an incentive. Whereas if your payments are not blocked, you're kind of like, well, what's the point of this whole Bitcoin thing? Right? Or if you're an American, you have access to dollars and you can also reinvest your dollars in the S&P 500, so you're not worried about even debasement of the dollar, really. You're kind of like, why is Bitcoin so important? I can just invest in the S&P 500. Whereas when you look around the world, a lot of people don't have that option, right? And so when people face blockages, when they face faster inflation, it's not surprising that when you look at, say, the Chainalysis Crypto Adoption Index, it's something like 16 out of 20 countries are developing. Because they're generally the sweet spot is countries that are pretty tech savvy, but that have really inflationary money. And so, for example, Nigeria.
Yeah, I was just about to say Nigeria.
Yeah, there you go. And so they, for 3 years almost, their central bank banned banks from sending money to exchanges, crypto exchanges. And yet they were like ranked number 2 in terms of adoption. And they specifically were number 1 in terms of like peer-to-peer volume, because that's how they were routing around banks. And so when you're facing, 15% inflation year after year after year after year, you learn pretty quick. I would say anyone who can drive a car can operate Bitcoin, at least technically. It's just you learn and you know how to do it. Whereas if you don't have a need, it just seems burdensome to you. And so I think that's one thing. And the other part is just economic, right? So like you said, if you have $100 of Bitcoin, probably doesn't make sense to pull that onto the chain because your fees are going to be burdensome, especially when you have to consider the future. So if you pull that onto the chain, and in the future, fees are more expensive, especially if they've risen kind of faster than the value of that Bitcoin. You could get stuck. I mean, fees could spike to $30 and you have a $100 UTXO, it's kind of blocked now. And so people have to kind of use that responsibly. And I think that, Lightning can scale in the sense that, if you're a power user and you want to use it fully non-custodially, you can. And, one on-chain transaction can now give you access to multiple payments. So it's scaling on a per person basis, even though it doesn't necessarily scale how many people can access it. And then there's other things like you said, Fedi mints and other technologies, and we'll see what other layers come. I mean, I'm interested in covenants, for example. We've seen developments on the Mercury layer. There's other things that can scale as well, and we just kind of see what catches on.
Finally, Lyn Alden explores the complex processes influencing Bitcoin adoption in further detail, emphasizing the critical role that user experience, UX, plays. She argues that a user experience similar to the smooth and simple design found in Apple products is essential for Bitcoin to become more widely accepted. She does, however, recognize the inherent difficulties in creating an interface this user-friendly, especially when it comes to non-custodial solutions where users keep ownership of their belongings. In addition, Lyn Alden presents an engaging story about the reasons people are adopting Bitcoin. According to her theory, individuals are more inclined to switch to Bitcoin in response to certain difficulties, including unsuccessful payments or unstable economic conditions like inflation. The speaker draws attention to an intriguing relationship between the adoption of cryptocurrencies and the economic circumstances of specific nations by highlighting the global landscape. She specifically notes that countries like Nigeria, which are both technologically advanced and facing inflation, have notable adoption rates for cryptocurrencies. The adoption of Bitcoin from an economic perspective is discussed, emphasizing the practical significance of transaction fees. The presenter delves into the predicament encountered by individuals holding comparatively little quantities of Bitcoin, such as a $100 UTXO, unspent transaction output. Such quantities could be too expensive to transfer onto the blockchain, especially in light of prospective future rises in transaction fees. This thoughtful analysis emphasizes the necessity of using Bitcoin sensibly and responsibly in real-world situations. Furthermore, Lyn Alden explores the Bitcoin ecosystem's scaling options, illuminating the Lightning Network. According to her, Lightning Network provides scalability on a per-person basis, even if it might not scale in the conventional sense to accommodate an increasing number of users. Power users may now take full use of the network, enabling several payments with a single on-chain transaction. Lyn Alden concludes by providing a thorough overview of the complex interactions that exist between UX, financial considerations, and scalability issues in the context of Bitcoin adoption. Her insightful research offers a comprehensive grasp of the obstacles and driving forces influencing people's choices to interact with this revolutionary technology. I hope you enjoyed the video. Until next time, happy investing.